Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Three Things I Learned Last Week. I'm back at home, fresh off of vacation, back in the western suburbs of Philadelphia. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today for our second edition. I can't believe I actually pulled off the first one, and I'm back in here to tell the tale. A little bit for those of you just joining us for the first time. My name is Robin Addis. I am the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer at Legal Internet Solutions Incorporated, a digital agency that specializes in digital marketing solutions for law firms and legal services providers. This program is my way of taking over LinkedIn to talk about things I find interesting, things I learned in the past week. Bringing on people hopefully in the future who will share something with my audience, teach us all something, because I feel like I'm always learning and I love it when I learn something new and I get to tell everybody about that. As always, you're going to hear me say this for a long time. I'm going to try my very best to take questions if there are any. There weren't any last week during the actual live broadcast, thank goodness. But if you have questions and I don't get to them, or if you want to reach out to me later, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn Messenger or shoot me an email. My email address is robin@legalisi.com. So today, three things I learned last week. I'm going to talk a little bit about last week's first live stream and what post-production of that live stream looked like. I had a really interesting conversation last week with a very good friend and colleague of mine about marketing versus business development. And I just wanted to share a little bit about that conversation and see what everybody else had to say, see what you think about it. And then the last thing I want to talk about, to pod or not to pod, talking specifically about LinkedIn engagement pods. So first, live streaming. Oh, actually, no, I forgot. The one thing I wanted to talk about before I got into anything, I'm sure everybody's seen it by now, the interesting comments from Morgan Stanley's chief legal officer and some of the blowback that has been flowing through the industry about his comments about return to the office. A lot of law firms, I think, are still figuring out how to navigate this. I've been talking with some clients and friends at firms. They have some ideas about going back hybrid or potentially full-time or fully remote. I think it's really running the entire spectrum. I'm interested to hear, really mostly just out of my own curiosity, what is your firm doing and how did you come to that decision? I'd love to hear from you if you are willing to share that. But of course, the blowback from Morgan Stanley's comments were swift and fierce. As you can see, there are a couple articles here, one from Above the Law and one from Vivia Chen. Shout out to Roy Sexton for sharing that on the Legal Marketing Association Facebook group page is where I found it. I just think it's really interesting because we're all in uncharted territory, and to use all of those euphemisms and cliche phrases, we're figuring this all out together. It will be interesting, in my professional opinion, to see what happens when firms do whatever they're going to do in the fall and see how that really plays out. The fall is obviously very busy, especially for firms whose fiscal year end is December 31st. I remember when I was in-house at a firm, the fall was crazy with budgeting and everything, and that would be challenging to potentially navigate remotely, but I think we're all making it work. So again, more just an interesting passing curiosity on my part. But back to three things I learned last week. Last week's first live stream went off rather smoothly. I actually surprised myself. The production itself was relatively smooth. I talked about StreamYard last week. It's a pretty intuitive tool if you're resourceful and like to get in and figure out how things work like I do. It was relatively easy to use and to figure out. Got my hype video loaded. I got my slides loaded. Here I am in the live stream. And it was very easy to broadcast to multiple channels at the same time. I was also able to download a video file and an audio only file of the recording, which was about 17 minutes long. And I'm going to sort of talk about what we're doing with that content and ways that you can use content like this when you do similar things, whether it's live streaming or a virtual presentation, etc. So I downloaded the video file and the audio file. I generated a transcript file, the text file of the transcript for accessibility purposes. I also generated a video with captions actually burned into it, made sure that all of the words were actually what I said. It was interesting to read some of the auto-generated captions. I'm going to try to speak just a little bit more slowly from now on. And I loaded that transcript and the video onto the Lisi website. So now anytime I do one of these broadcasts, I will load the transcript and the video directly to the Lisi website. So if somebody can discover the video on our website, potentially through our social media, through my own LinkedIn account, lots of ways to discover this content because people are going to be coming from multiple locations. Another thing we're doing with the content is I used a tool called Audiogram. And if you're familiar with podcasting or if you have a podcast, you probably already know about Audiogram or a similar tool. And Audiogram is a way to create a video from an audio file. So of course I have this video, right? I have the video of me actually talking, but I wanted to create something different, something more visually different than just me talking, talking head on the screen. So I used Audiogram to create the video I'm about to share, which has the captions or has sort of the text while I'm speaking and a WAV file showing, my voice modulating. So I'm just going to share a brief snippet of it so you can see what it's all about. The other thing, next thing I should say that I want to talk about, quality versus quantity content on LinkedIn. So that's a whole 2-minute video. I pulled out a specific snippet of something I wanted to talk about that I thought would be relevant for my audience on LinkedIn. It's going to promote the program itself. It's also going to promote, me talking about LinkedIn. And it'll be something that I can use on my own social media and potentially we might use at Lisi in some of our email communications, et cetera. It's a great way to create an evergreen piece from a timely piece of content. So these videos that I'm doing, these live streams that I'm doing are somewhat timely. They are rooted in a time and place. I'm talking about something that I learned recently, and they might not always be fresh perspectives. 3, 6, 12 months down the line, it might not be relevant, but I can pull out certain pieces, certain snippets of the content and create an evergreen or something. When I say evergreen, I mean something that is generally always going to be relevant. So I can pull out that evergreen snippet of it and use it in multiple ways. So food for thought. I know if you are a lawyer watching this and you've worked with a legal marketer, I know you've heard this before, but every single thing that you do, you should get as much traction out of it as you possibly can. You want to make sure that it's not just a one and done. You're spending a lot of time and your time is very valuable. You're spending a lot of time doing these things. So make sure that you are finding ways to use that content in multiple channels, multiple avenues. And if you have a marketer that you can rely on, use them because they want to help you do this. The next thing I wanted to talk about, marketing versus business development. So I'm going to back up here just a little bit. I started out in legal marketing in 2007, right before the financial downturn in 2008 and 2009. I started out as a marketing assistant at a large international firm based here in Philadelphia. And at the time, I did not have any marketing experience prior to joining. Well, that's not true. I had some marketing experience, but it was all self-taught. Even though I went to an excellent school here in Philadelphia, a college here in Philadelphia that had an excellent marketing program. I actually went for political science because I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And then I changed my mind. So when I started at the law firm, I was started at the ground level and I sort of worked my way up. Everything I know about marketing, I have either learned from somebody, learned on the job, or self-taught. And I share that because it's interesting to come up over the past, almost 15 years, whatever that math is, come up through the marketing and legal marketing industry specifically and sort of see this evolution of the dichotomy between marketing and business development. And I had this really interesting conversation with a very good friend of mine last week. I'll let her self-identify if she so chooses, about that shift, especially coming out of the financial downturn where marketers, legal marketing is a relatively, nascent profession, maybe like 30, maybe 40 years at this point, sort of since we've been allowed to market lawyers. And so marketing, I think, generated out of people who just had a knack for marketing potentially, or just had an interest in it in law firms in the very beginning. And so around the financial downturn, my friend posited, we sort of had to do somewhat of a rebrand and rethink about how marketing was able to have a strategic and influential role in firms. And that sort of came to this divide with marketing and business development. So flash forward about 10 years, and I find it interesting because I do think that there is a little bit of a push and pull between marketing and business development in firms, especially firms where the teams are large enough to have people sort of on both sides. And looking at, I wanted to try and predict the future here, looking at what might happen coming out of this pandemic, it will be interesting to see how business development and marketing can sort of recoalesce a little bit. Not that they aren't working well together now, but how business developers will have to maybe become a little bit more fluent in some of the tactical marketing things. And also tactical marketing people need to really understand and be able to speak the business development language, because we're all, there's only so many opportunities for in-person interaction, and there's only so many ways to get in front of somebody digitally. So you have to figure out how to leverage those opportunities for maximum impact. So really no big message coming from me out of this one. It was just an interesting food for thought conversation that I had last week. And I'm really interested to hear from you, legal marketers, lawyers, people who have gone on from legal marketing or the legal profession into other industries. I'm super interested to hear what you've observed during your time or while you're where you are now, and what you think might be happening coming out of this pandemic, looking 2, 3, 5 years down the road. What is that going to look like? How is marketing and business development that interplay going to be? Shoot me a line. I want to hear from you, or comment on the video. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about, it is actually my most meaty portion of this presentation today, engagement pods on LinkedIn. And I want to talk about this because I've seen a lot of pro and negative comments about engagement pods. And I sort of agree with both sides of the conversation. But let me back up a second. An engagement pod is a private group of people who promise to regularly engage with one another's content, really to try and beat the algorithm on LinkedIn. I think they started probably on Instagram, or they could have started any number of places, but just helping one another. There's a bot somewhere checking to see how valuable they think your content is based on what hashtags you use and, what language you use, et cetera. And so helping game the system, so to speak, with an engagement pod. So LinkedIn's algorithm works so that your posts are reviewed by a machine. Essentially, they're reviewed by bots. It happens immediately. And really the purpose of this is to help flag anything that might be spam. So if you use a gajillion hashtags, or you tag 100 people that you really shouldn't, there's all sorts of tips and tricks to avoid being spam on LinkedIn, because nobody wants you to be spam. And I'm pretty sure you don't want to be spam yourself. So the bots review your content to see if it's spam. And then your post is scored based on quality. So quality meaning specifically the engagement, who's reacting to it, who's commenting on it. Posts that pass a certain threshold, they get a certain number of posts within a certain period of time, certain number of comments within a certain period of time, certain number of reactions within a certain period of time. They actually might be elevated to actual human beings at LinkedIn reviewing your content and deciding whether or not to extend that content beyond your first degree network. So this is where engagement pods come in. If you have content that seems to be high quality because you've got people interacting with it and reacting to it, especially within a certain period of time right after it goes live, you are potentially able to game the system. And especially comments are very, very helpful in this case. That helps you amplify your reach. The more that you can be exposed beyond your immediate network, the greater reach that you have. And it's also, engagement pods also offer an opportunity for improved networking and collaboration. If you do it in an intentional way, you're actually building relationships with those people. So here are the cons to engagement pods. it's only one part of the solution. There's so much that you have to do on LinkedIn. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but there is a lot that you have to put into LinkedIn to really make it valuable and worthwhile for you and for your audience. It doesn't take a lot of time once you figure out how to do it, but it does take some effort to get ramped up and to be active. So engagement pods are only one part of the solution, and they're not always genuine. You have to be really careful about the pod that you're engaging with. Superficial engagement can actually really hurt your credibility. So if it's always the same people posting or commenting all the time, and it's always, it's obvious to people if you have the same 37 people always liking and commenting on your post. And if it's obvious to human beings, it's absolutely obvious to the machines, the AI. And because it's probably going to be obvious to the AI, it's definitely going to be obvious. It's going to be flagged for people at LinkedIn, and they could react and they could flag your content, or worse, your profile, as spam. I've seen some people commented that they've been put into LinkedIn prison before, jokingly, but because they tried to game the system and they got knocked down for it. So if you are going to engage in a LinkedIn pod, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. You just have to be very intentional and very careful about how you do it. You want to make sure that the content quality of the people who are posting, and of course your own content, it's very high quality. It's relevant, it's useful. It's timely, it's novel. It's not a bunch of content that's been said 1,000 times. It's not demanding, it's not like sales pitches, right? It's something that's interesting to help this network, this community actually learn something and grow. It should be relevant, and the pod should have some exclusivity to it. It should be, when I talk to some clients about engagement pods, I talk about like 3 to 5 people that you maybe ask once or twice a month, because it's your content that really matters to you. You really want to make sure it gets a broad reach. And so you tap into that pod, not, 3 to 5 people that you ask every single day. It's going to be obvious and you're going to get flagged. The other thing is that there should be a training component to your pod if you want to have one. Everybody should understand what the spam triggers are on LinkedIn. Everybody should understand how to write how to write content that generates engagement. People should know how to interact with one another's content on LinkedIn. For example, if you're going to comment on somebody's post on LinkedIn, you want to make sure that that comment is meaningful. It can't just be like, great, thanks. You should be furthering the conversation, because that helps you. It helps the person you're commenting on, and it's really the best way to engage on LinkedIn. I already talked about size, but you want to make sure it's really just a handful of closely knit people, in my professional opinion, and the frequency, not all the time, very sparingly. You don't want to, if you're asking like a networking group or a group of people, colleagues, you don't want to bother them all the time. Even if everybody's agreeing to do this, I think you have to be selective with what you ask them to engage with. So pods, take it or leave it. It can help if you do it well, if you do it smartly and you're not abusing the system. But just make sure you know what you're doing and everybody's going into it intentionally. So that is my spiel for today. Thank you so much once again for tuning in with me. I actually already know what I want to talk about next week. My friend and colleague, Kristen Brophy, wants to join me to talk about lighting for live streaming and virtual programs. She actually has a background in lighting design, so I think that'll be really interesting to hear from her. I'm also going to dive into, I've done nothing with this yet, but this week I intend to dive into figuring out how I can use the audio files from my live streams and potentially publish them as podcasts. So I'll let you know what I find out with that. And also, I read a really interesting article this past week about origination credit and diversity. And I didn't have enough time to really dive into that. So I'm going to do some more research on that this week, and I want to talk about that next week. So thank you everybody so much for joining me, and I will see you soon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.